Hello, everyone. I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Before we start, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's begin. Get comfortable and relax.
It was the summer of 1997 when Mark first told us about the abandoned logging camp deep in the Alaskan wilderness. We were a group of recent college grads ready for adventure, but skeptical of Mark's plan for us to hike out and spend a week camping there. "It'll be epic," Mark kept insisting. "Just us, the mountains, and a camp all to ourselves." The camp apparently dated back to the 1940s when logging companies were trying to harvest the interior. It was only accessible via an overgrown mining road that cut through 80 miles of mountainous forest. The companies gave up after a few years, the trees too large and remote to be worth the effort. Too isolated to justify dismantling, they simply left the camp behind. Mark discovered it while studying old surveyor maps for his degree in Alaskan history. The spot called out to his sense of exploration, with the promise of untouched nature and discovery. He'd convinced his girlfriend Julie to go with his plan and then recruited us to join them. "Come on, it'll be an adventure," Mark implored, his stubbled face split into a wide grin. "Just think, we'll be the first people there in over 50 years. Julie's apprehension was obvious, her petite frame tucked against Mark beneath the circle of trees. She gave us an apologetic smile, knowing Mark could be hard to resist when seized with excitement. Our friend Steve shook his head firmly, his stocky frame settled on the picnic bench. "You're crazy, man. Why would we hike all that way just to see an abandoned shed?" "It's more than a shed," Mark insisted. "There are bunkhouses, equipment, and according to the records, even an old steam locomotive." Steve remained unconvinced, but Jake and I exchanged a glance, tempted despite the crazy plan. As Julie debated with Mark, I stared up at the Alaskan night sky, the stars brighter than any I'd ever seen. Maybe it was the vibe of untamed nature all around us in the 49th state, but suddenly the idea didn't seem so absurd. "Look, you really think it's still there?" Jake asked. "Couldn't have collapsed or rotted by now?" Mark shrugged, hands raised. "Who knows? Even if the camp is gone, think of the hike. When's the last time any of us did something like this?" A wave of restlessness washed over me. We'd just graduated, and the future loomed ahead back in the lower 48 states. Another office job, rent payments, the daily slog. "I don't know about you all, but I'd rather try to find some abandoned locomotive than start job hunting," I said. Jake laughed. "All right, I'm convinced. Let's do this." Steve groaned, reluctant to be the only holdout. "It does sound pretty cool," he conceded. "But if we all get eaten by bears, I'm blaming you, Mark." We spent the next week planning and gathering gear and supplies for several days out in the backcountry. The shy kiss Mark planted on Julie's cheek made it clear this trip was as much about winning her over as uncovering some hidden piece of history. Early on a brisk Saturday, we loaded our packs into Mark's SUV and set off for the mountains. As we left the highways and paved roads behind, excitement mingled with doubt. Were we really cut out for this wilderness trek? The mining road was right where the old map indicated. Mark shifted into four-wheel drive before we started up the rocky path, hemmed in by towering pines. "No turning back now," Jake said, voicing all our nerves and anticipation. We bumped and crawled mile after mile into the mountains, the road narrowing as the forest grew denser. Mark remained fixated on the GPS, guiding us onward. Shadows stretched as the sun sank toward the western peaks. "Shouldn't we camp soon?" Julie asked softly. Mark's adamant headshake said we were hiking on. Dusk fell, headlights cutting through the darkness of the encroaching trees. Until suddenly, we emerged into an open area that took our breath away. Towering above, illuminated by the moon and stars, were the weathered timbers of an enormous barn-like structure. The abandoned camp. "Told you," Mark said, flashing a victorious smile. Steve let out an impressed whistle. "I'll be damned." We sat in awed silence, the reality sinking in. We were the first people to lay eyes on this place in over 50 years. We arrived at the abandoned logging camp in the late afternoon, the shadows of the towering pines already stretching long across the broad clearing. Jake let out an impressed whistle as he took in the decaying array of wooden structures before us. "Well, I'll be damned. It really is still here," he said. 3 large bunkhouses surrounded a clearing dotted with rusted machinery and coils of cable. At the far end loomed a massive barn, its slanted roof crowned with a rustic cupola. Behind that, the metal skeleton of a steam engine sat half engulfed by underbrush. "Told you guys this would be epic," Mark said, flashing us a grin. "Now let's find a spot to set up camp before it gets dark." We drove to a flat area near the tree line and unpacked our gear. The late summer air held a loamy dampness that promised rain. Mosquitoes hummed in hungry swarms, attacking any exposed skin as we hurried to erect our tents. Steve swatted at his neck and arms. "These things are vicious," he complained. "Mark, there better not be mosquitoes like this the whole time we're out here." Mark just laughed as he snapped together his tent poles. "We're in their territory now. Just keep spraying on that repellent." Once the tents were up, we scouted the area to gather fallen branches for a campfire. The skittering of unseen creatures in the underbrush raised the hairs on the back of my neck. A distant owl hooted, its call echoing through the quiet forest. This place already felt different than any wilderness I'd experienced. Steve got a small fire crackling in the stone-ringed pit we found near our tents. As dusk deepened into night, we gladly crowded close to the warmth and light of the flames. Our meager dinner of beans and hot dogs soon bubbled above the fire. "To adventure," Mark said, raising his tin cup of whiskey and a toast. We clinked our cups together, laughing at his enthusiasm. The liquor lit a warm glow in my chest to fight the deepening chill. Soon we were swapping stories of past misadventures and dreams for the future while the fire snapped and sparked. Mark kept sidling closer to Julie on the wooden log they shared until she leaned into him with a smile. Watching their growing connection, I felt a sense of loneliness, missing my own girlfriend back home. "All right, I gotta know," Jake said, turning to Mark across the flames. "How'd you convince Julie to come out to this abandoned camp with you anyway?" Julie laughed, her cheeks flushing as she met Mark's gaze. "Let's just say he can be very persuasive." "I just asked her to go on a crazy adventure with me," Mark said. He planted a quick kiss on her temple. "Who could say no to that?" "Well, I think Julie needs to be checked for insanity," Steve joked. The kidding camaraderie eased the underlying tension we all felt out here in the rugged wilderness. As the fire died down to glowing embers, a bone-deep exhaustion settled over me. We'd been driving and hiking for most of the past 2 days. My sleeping bag called to me from inside the tent. Yawning, I said goodnight to the others and made my way over the springy duff of the forest floor. I wriggled into my sleeping bag, the nylon tent walls creaking in the night breeze. The murmur of voices around the fire faded as I slipped into unconsciousness. Sometime later, I startled awake, momentarily confused about where I was. Muffled laughter echoed from the direction of the fire. The woods were bathed in silver moonlight filtered through the trembling leaves. I smiled to myself, hearing the ongoing jokes and banter of my friends, glad they were still up enjoying themselves. Comforted, I rolled over and drifted back to sleep. Morning arrived damp and gray. Heavy mist pressed down between the dark tree trunks, muffling any distant sounds. I hurried to pull on boots and a jacket, anxious to get to the warmth of the rekindled fire. The others were already up drinking cups of steaming instant coffee. Steve had gotten a small blaze going again with the previous night's embers. We huddled gratefully around the crackling heat. "So what's the plan today?" Julie asked through chattering teeth. Mark blew into his hands and glanced toward the looming structures. "I want to check out some of those old bunkhouses and see if there's any equipment left inside." His eyes held that excited gleam again. Steve groaned dramatically. "You mean we have to move? Can't we just sit by the fire all day?" "Come on, we didn't come all this way just to sit around," Mark replied. With some good-natured grumbling, we gulped the rest of our coffees and followed him across the clearing. Our boots crunched on gravel and broken glass as we neared the dilapidated bunkhouse. Yellowed curtains still hung in a few cracked windows, swaying faintly in the breeze. The wooden walls showed deep cracks from decades of harsh weather. With Mark in the lead, we gingerly stepped up onto the sagging porch. The front door creaked open on rusty hinges, stirring up dust that swirled in the dim light. We coughed and waved our hands until it settled, revealing a large open room filled with debris. "This must have been where the workers lived," Mark said, voice hushed in the gloomy space. The bunk beds lining the walls stood in various states of disrepair. Some had collapsed completely, just a few rotting planks remaining. Those still intact were stripped of any mattresses or blankets, leaving bare, stained mattress frames topped with a scattering of brown leaves. Along one wall stood a cast-iron wood stove, its stovepipe chimney disappearing up through the ceiling. Dented metal pots and pans cluttered the stovetop, coated in layers of dirt and cobwebs. I ran a finger through the grime on a nearby windowsill. "No one's cleaned this place in a long time," I said. My finger left a streak in the filth. Julie wandered over to a shelf mounted on the wall. Cracked porcelain dishes and cups stood in neat rows, ready for a meal that would never come. She picked up a mug, turning it over in her hands. Faded blue flowers circled the rim beneath the dust. "Strange to think people used to wake up here every morning, make coffee, go to work," she said. "All these years later just left exactly as it was," added Steve. He scratched at some flaky paint on the wall with his fingernail. It peeled away easily, the wood underneath stained a dark brown. Mark peered into a nearby locker, the door hanging half off its hinges. Inside sat neat stacks of yellowed work clothes and pairs of thick boots. "Wonder if these would still fit any of us," he said with a grin. Jake had wandered over to a desk in the corner. An ancient typewriter sat on top, its keys brown with rust. Strewn across the desk were weathered notebooks, their pages warped and stained. He gingerly lifted the cover of one, squinting to read the faded script inside. "Looks like these were the loggers' daily reports," he said. "This one is dated August 13th, 1949. Says, cut down 25 spruce today, mostly young growth. Mosquitoes fierce near the ridge." He trailed off, carefully turning the crumbling pages. A strange silence settled over the room as we all imagined the workers writing by lantern light, swatting mosquitoes while the stove crackled. Their mundane daily accounts somehow survived, while they themselves were decades gone. I noticed a few cracked black and white photos still hanging crookedly on the wall. Stepping closer, I saw they showed groups of lumberjacks posing with towering tree trunks and piles of cut logs, all of them squinting at the camera, some smiling with pipes clamped between their teeth. "Tough-looking bunch," I commented. Mark nodded. They had to be to work in these conditions every day. I stared into their weathered faces, trying to picture them sitting around at the end of a long day, playing cards and smoking. As unreadable as stone, yet they must have had hopes and fears like anyone else. Now merely ghosts in crumbling photographs. "Crazy how this was all just left behind when the companies pulled out," Steve said. "All their stuff right where they lived." Julie shivered a bit, hugging herself against the chill. "Does kind of feel like we're trespassing, seeing all this." We grew quiet again, pondering the faded glimpses of human history surrounding us. A half-played chessboard on an overturned barrel, initials carved into a bedpost, stacked yellowed newspapers from decades past, echoes of people now buried in the Alaskan soil. "We should probably get moving," Mark finally said, breaking the strange, melancholy spell. "Still more to explore out there." I took one last look around the gloomy room before following my friends back outside into the hazy light. After exploring the old bunkhouse, we headed towards the massive barn structure at the far end of the camp. As we walked, I glanced back at our tents just visible through the trees. Something about the campsite looked different now in the daylight. I stopped walking and turned to get a better look. There, among the trees surrounding our tents, were strange markings carved into the trunks. They almost looked like... "Hey guys, check this out," I said, pointing toward the markings. My friends stopped and turned. "What is it?" asked Jake. "There's something carved on those trees near our tents. Can't really make it out from here, but it looks weird." We changed course and hiked over to get a closer look. As we got nearer, the markings became clearer. They were definitely not natural. Intricate symbols and lines had been crudely carved into several of the tree trunks just out of view of our campfire. "Whoa, these are creepy looking," said Steve as he leaned in to examine one of the symbols. It looked vaguely Celtic in design, with loops and spirals gouged deep into the bark. Mark ran his hand over another symbol, a circle bisected by a straight line. "These almost look like runes or something," he said. He glanced around uneasily. "Were these here when we arrived yesterday?" I shook my head. "I don't remember seeing any strange markings. I think I would have noticed something like this near our tents." A heavy silence fell over the group as we exchanged tense glances. The surrounding forest suddenly felt a lot more ominous. Who could have done this just overnight? And what did the strange symbols mean? "Maybe it was another camping group passing through?" suggested Julie hopefully. But she didn't sound convinced. Mark examined a few more of the marked trunks. "I don't know. These look pretty deliberately carved, not just some random vandalism." The symbols gave me an uneasy feeling, like we were being watched. I half expected to spot someone peering out between the massive tree trunks. But all was still and silent around us, only the wind faintly rustling branches high overhead. "Fan me out, guys. Let's see if there are any more around here," Mark said, slipping into take charge mode. We moved slowly through the trees, scanning for additional markings. About 50 feet out, Jake whistled sharply. "Found another over here." We converged on the deeply etched symbol he was examining. It was a simple circle with a diagonal line through the center, very different from the Celtic-looking ones. "This is really strange," I muttered. "Who would come all the way out here just to do this?" Mark shook his head, mystified. "I know I was excited to find this camp, but I can't imagine another group hiking these remote backwoods just to carve up trees." We kept searching, soon finding more of the carved trunks threading away from our campsite and into the dense forest. They seemed to follow a winding path, the markings on some trees much fresher than others. I felt the hairs on my neck prickle as we passed a buckled birch tree etched with a symbol resembling a slender-limbed spider. Something about these markings disturbed me on a primal level, like a warning sign tapped out in an ancient language. "Guys, I don't like this," Julie said. She crossed her arms tight, eyes darting around the shadowy woods surrounding us. "It's like someone was leaving a trail right to our campsite." "Yeah, this is all really creepy," said Steve. "Any chance this is your idea of a prank, Mark?" Mark held up his hands. "You really think I'd sneak around carving spooky symbols on trees? This wasn't us." That only deepened the mystery. We were at least 10 miles from any roads or trails out here. Was someone lurking in these remote woods? The whole area took on an unsettled vibe that prickled the hair on the back of my neck. Part of me wanted to pack up our gear that very minute and get the hell out of there. But at the same time, all the strange symbols captivated me. I couldn't shake the feeling they were hints of something larger, even if my rational mind resisted such fanciful notions. Mark slid his small hatchet from his belt and tapped it thoughtfully against a nearby tree trunk. "You know, I'd like to follow this trail a bit and see where it leads. Maybe we can figure out who's doing this." Steve shuffled his feet, looking ready to bolt from the woods at any moment. "Yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe we should just leave it alone." "I'm with Steve," said Julie, her face pale. "This feels wrong somehow. Let's just go." Mark looked to Jake and me, eyebrows raised. I understood Julie's unease, but the temptation to unravel the mystery tugged at me. Jake met my eye and gave a subtle nod. "I say we see where the trail leads," I told Mark, ignoring Julie's worried sigh. "As long as we stick together and stay alert. But no splitting up." Mark grinned, glad to have recruits for his investigation. "You got it. We'll track this just a bit and see if we can spot anyone else out here." With Jake and I on board, Steve reluctantly agreed to come along too. Safety in numbers, I suppose. I could tell Julie was nervous about it as we slowly followed the unnerving trail deeper into the shadowy forest. But she stayed close to Mark's side, her jaw set in stubborn resolution. The carved markings led us in winding switchbacks, sometimes growing faint and hard to spot. Other times, they'd emerge freshly gouged and oozing sap on the broad trunk of a hemlock or spruce. It definitely seemed deliberate, not just random vandalism. Watching our tense faces and hunched shoulders, an observer might have found the scene comical, like kids scaring themselves with a spooky story. But actually being out in those dense woods, the isolating quiet broken only by the occasional ominous creak of a tree limb, it was truly unsettling. I glanced at my watch after we'd been walking for nearly a half hour. The trail showed no sign of ending, and we were a good ways from camp now. But no one had voiced turning back yet. We hiked the trail of carved symbols for over an hour before finally reaching the edge of a small clearing. Exhausted and on edge, we decided to make camp for the night. But the discovery of those strange markings still weighed heavy on all of our minds. As we gathered firewood, I kept watching the trees for any sign of figures lurking in the shadows. The normal forest sounds of birds and squirrels seemed muted, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Once our fire was crackling, we sat around it looking bedraggled and anxious. Julie kept glancing over her shoulder into the darkening woods. "This place gives me the creeps," she said with a shiver. "Those symbols, the trail ... IT ... like something out there is watching us." Mark put a comforting arm around her. "We don't know for sure someone is watching us. Could just be some weird local tradition we're not aware of." But the explanation sounded weak, even as he said it. I'm with Julie. This is seriously freaky, said Steve. He was whittling a stick nervously with his pocket knife. I say we get the hell out of here first thing tomorrow. I stared into the leaping flames, torn between unease and fascination. What do you guys think the symbols mean? I asked. Any ideas? Maybe it's some kind of ancient language, suggested Jake. Like a lost native tribe or something living out here. Steve let out a derisive snort. A lost tribe? Come on, man, this isn't some cheesy movie. Hey, you got a better explanation then? Jake shot back. Steve just shook his head grimly and went back to whittling. It is pretty remote out here, I said slowly. If some group wanted to disappear, I imagine these woods would be perfect for it. Mark nodded. I've read about hermits and holdouts still hiding deep in the wilderness, but carving up trees is an odd way to stay hidden. Whatever is doing this, I wish it would leave us alone, said Julie. She threw a stick into the hungry flames. It feels targeted, like we're being tracked. A heavy silence fell over our group as we all stared into the fire, lost in thought. Even with 4 other people around me, I'd never felt so exposed and unsettled. The surrounding forest was an imposing wall of blackness, barely lit by our struggling fire. The night wore on as we kept debating the mystery in hushed voices. Weariness eventually overtook the group. One by one, they retired to sleep until only Mark and I remained by the dying fire. You should get some rest, I told him. I'll keep first watch tonight. Mark nodded gratefully and squeezed my shoulder. Thanks, man. Just a few hours. Keep that fire going. I stoked the embers as Mark headed to his tent. Now alone, the dark forest seemed to creep in closer around me. Any snapping twig or rustling bush set my heart pounding. I found myself constantly glancing toward the trees, dreading the moment a pale face would emerge from the blackness. When my eyes started drooping, I piled more wood on the fire, welcoming the heat and light that fought back the shadows. But despite my best efforts to stay alert, sleep still overcame me sometime before dawn. Jake shaking my shoulder startled me awake. Early daylight filtering through the trees revealed a scene that sent my heart sinking. Carved into several of the trees ringing our new campsite were more of the bizarre symbols. Shit, I hissed through gritted teeth, scrambling to my feet. The others were already up examining the markings, their faces etched with fear and frustration. They followed us, Julie said softly. She looked utterly exhausted, as if she hadn't slept a wink. Mark ran a hand over his stubbled face. This can't be a coincidence. Something out there is tracking us, moving in the night. Then let's not stick around to find out what, urged Steve. His eyes were bleary and bloodshot from lack of sleep. We need to hike straight back to the cars today. I stared helplessly at the ominous symbols that watched over us during the night. My skin crawled, imagining unseen eyes observing me as I dozed by the dying fire. Mark and I should never have let our guard down. Steve's right. We should head back, I said. Returning felt like admitting defeat, but we were shaken and needed to regroup. As we prepared to leave, Mark started following another trail of freshly carved markings away from camp. He turned back to us with a determined look. You guys hike out if you want, but I need to see where this goes. Something strange is happening here, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. Julie hurried over to him. Mark, please, this is dangerous. We should go back together. But looking into his eyes, I could tell his mind was made up. Jake and Steve opted to head out with Julie, but I couldn't leave Mark alone to pursue whatever was out there. I'll go with Mark to watch his back, I told the others. We'll catch up soon. They reluctantly agreed and started packing up. As they slung on their backpacks and grabbed hiking sticks, I saw fear and relief etched on their tired faces. Part of me wanted nothing more than to follow them to the safety of our vehicles. But loyalty bound me to Mark and whatever unknown awaited down this latest eerie trail. Mark gave Julie a long embrace and whispered something to reassure her. Then he and I took deep breaths and headed off once more into the dense trees. Mark and I hiked in tense silence, following the trail of disturbing symbols deeper into the increasingly dense forest. Part of me still couldn't believe we were willingly going farther down this path instead of racing back to the cars with the others. But I knew Mark would keep pressing on regardless, too consumed by the mystery. And I couldn't abandon him to face the unknown alone. We walked nearly an hour without speaking, our boots crunching over the carpet of twigs and pine needles. The symbols led us along a meandering route past massive cedar and spruce trunks dripping with emerald moss. I soon lost all sense of direction, unsure if we were still parallel to the path leading back to camp. Mark paused to examine another symbol etched deep into the furrowed bark of an ancient spruce. This one resembled a skeletal hand with long, talon-like fingers. Just looking at its crude, jagged lines radiated a palpable menace. Mark's brow furrowed as he lightly traced the grooves. "These seem to be getting more ... intense," he said. "Or maybe ritualistic is the word. Definitely not just random vandalism." I shuddered, vividly imagining the sharp blade gouging into the tough wood. What sort of coldly determined hand could carve such images? And for what dark purpose? Mark slid his hatchet from his belt with a metallic rasp and gripped its handle tightly. "Let's keep moving, but keep alert. No telling if whoever is doing this is still out there." I nodded, eyeing the dense trees with apprehension. The shadows between the massive trunks could easily conceal anyone or anything trailing us unseen. We continued following the symbols, the tension growing with each new finding. The markings appeared more frequently now, sometimes in clusters on the sides of gnarled pines and cedars. They grew consistently more elaborate, the crude lines forming disturbing shapes and patterns. I paused when I noticed scratches ringing a tree at waist height, as if made by claws frantically scouring the bark. My pulse quickened as I imagined some frenzied animal scraping them into the wood. Mark noticed my expression and followed my gaze. He slowly reached out to touch one of the scratches, swallowing hard. "Jesus, looks like something was trying to claw right through the trunk." The raw fear in his voice snapped me out of my hypnotized dread. Mark was always seeking adventure, rarely shaken, but now his face had gone ghostly pale beneath the stubble. I realized continuing deeper into these woods went against every self-preserving instinct we had. "Mark, I think we should turn back," I said quietly. "Whatever is down here doing these things, I don't think we want to find it." He kept staring wide-eyed at the scratched tree, hesitant to move as if some creature still clawed on the other side. After a few more tense moments, he gave a stiff nod. "Yeah, let's get the hell out of here," he rasped, finally tearing his eyes away. "I've seen enough." With weak smiles of relief, we turned and started retracing our steps back up the trail of symbols. I tried not to imagine unseen watchers tracking us from the trees as we wound among the massive trunks. Moving quicker now, it wasn't long before we came to a spot where the trail simply disappeared. No more newly carved marks on the trees ahead. We spun around slowly, searching for any trace of the symbols that had led us this far. But there was nothing. Where did they go?" Mark asked, panic creeping into his voice. We backtracked and searched the area thoroughly, but the trail was just gone. It was as if we'd crossed some threshold beyond which the carver of the runes no longer wanted us to pass. Adrenaline surged through my veins as the realization sunk in. We were lost and completely turned around. With no trail markers, nothing looked familiar. Towering pines surrounded us on all sides like the endless, repeating walls of a maze. "Can you remember the way back?" I asked Mark, hearing the desperation in my own voice. He shook his head, eyes darting around. No, it all looks the same. We must have gotten off track somewhere." Fear poured off him in waves. I tried to swallow my rising panic, but dread overwhelmed me. We were helpless and exposed to something sinister lurking unseen all around. And now we were lost in this nightmare labyrinth. Pulling out my compass provided only slight relief. At least now we knew which way was south, the general direction of the abandoned camp. But who knew how far away that was, or what lay between here and there? "We'll just keep heading south," Mark said, trying to sound positive. "As long as we don't deviate, we've got to run into something familiar sooner or later." Neither of us believed it, but we had no better options. Gripping our gear, we began trudging through the trackless woods, choosing our bearing as straight south as possible. The trees stood utterly still and silent, giving no hint of the way back to safety. Time dragged by at a crawl. The sun sank toward the jagged western peaks, casting long shadows between the trees. Any snap of a branch or rustle of leaves made us freeze, eyes darting. But nothing ever emerged from the creeping darkness. As blackness fell, we knew we had to make camp for the night. Without a trail to follow, we'd only get more lost stumbling blindly ahead. We gathered fallen branches and piled them high, not caring that the fire would act like a beacon. Keeping back the smothering darkness felt vital, no matter who or what might see the light. Hunkering close to the spitting flames, we chewed jerky in silence, too tired and afraid for conversation. A bone-deep chill had settled into my limbs, even as sweat beaded my brow from the fire. But Mark's ragged breathing and darting eyes revealed the chill gripping him came from something more than just the night air. Neither of us dared voice the terrifying questions running through our minds in the fire-lit darkness. What could carve such disturbing symbols into the trees? At some point, exhaustion overtook fear, and I slipped into fitful sleep. But each time I jolted awake, it was from the same nightmare, fleeing for my life down an endless trail of symbols with something monstrous close behind. Mark's face haunted by firelight told me his dreams were stalked by the same unrelenting horrors. Dawn's filtered light brought little comfort. We were still lost, and the unearthly woods were as frightening by day as by night. But driven by that primal urge to survive, we forced ourselves to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Southward we hiked as straight as we could, no longer investigating any strange markings that crossed our path. Single-minded determination focused only on finding a way out. We ignored our hunger, thirst, and exhaustion, minor pains compared to what likely awaited if we failed. By late afternoon, we were near collapsing. The woods seemed even more overgrown and foreign than where we started. Hope was fading fast, but just then, the trees ahead opened up into a gloomy clearing. My heart leaped at the sight. Finally, a change in the endless wooded tapestry. But as we staggered into the clearing, what we saw drained any last flicker of hope. In the center lay the body of a large elk, throat slit open in a spreading dark stain. Strange symbols were carved into its sides, trails of flies swarming the cuts. Mark looked ready to vomit, and I had to turn away gagging. This was the very same hand that had marked the trees to herd us here. When I finally dared meet Mark's eyes again, Any last shreds of denial had burned away. Something evil and intelligent lurked in this forest, playing us like pieces moved across a board. After the gruesome discovery in the clearing, Mark and I stumbled on in a daze until the darkness forced us to make camp again. Neither of us spoke as we numbly gathered firewood and pitched the tent, moving like sleepwalkers through a nightmare. Exhaustion finally won out over the gruesome visions looping in my mind, and I collapsed into my sleeping bag. But sleep brought little escape. Flames flickered against the tent walls as I drifted into feverish dreams of being stalked through the shadowy woods. Then suddenly, a blood-curdling scream jolted me awake. I lay paralyzed in my sleeping bag, heart pounding wildly, until I heard Mark's panicked breaths in the dark beside me. "Jesus, I hope that was just a dream," Mark whispered. "Me too," I managed, mouth dry with terror. We were lost and did not need reminders of what shared this forest with us. Eventually, I slipped back into an uneasy sleep, the distant shriek still repeating in my mind. But morning came too soon, the thin light barely penetrating the dense canopy overhead. Neither of us had gotten much real rest. As we forced down a meager breakfast, the surrounding trees seemed to creep closer, trapping us with their massive trunks. The memory of that mutilated elk flashes kept invading my thoughts, stealing away any appetite. And Mark's vacant stare into the smoldering campfire said he was trapped in the same relentless visions. When we finally packed up and resumed our aimless trek, there was no more idle talk of mystery or adventure. Now each step carried the grim determination of the hunted. We both knew somehow we were being played with, driven like prey for some unseen predator's sport. Midday came and went with no change in the woods or our direction. Each shadowy thicket looked the same as the last. The compass bearing kept us heading south, but with no point of reference, we could have been going in circles for all I knew. Mark slapped angrily at a swarm of mosquitoes around his head. "We've got to find water soon," he muttered. "Can't keep this up with no supplies." Fatigue and frustration strained his voice. I barely registered his words, focused only on not tripping over the roots and stones littering the forest floor. My legs were leaden, feet blistered and raw, but stopping seemed even more dangerous than pressing on. As the light began to fade, we scanned desperately for any spot that might serve as a camp. But the trees remained relentlessly uniform, with no break in their endless ranks. For all we knew, we were still smack in the center of the hundreds of square miles of backcountry wilderness. Finally too dark to see, we slumped against the trunk of a towering cedar tree and unpacked our remaining ration of trail mix. At this point, I was ready to gnaw the bark for sustenance. Mark held out the nearly empty plastic bag to me. "Here, make sure to save a handful for the morning." I took a small portion and passed it back, unwilling to meet his eye. We were quite literally in survival mode now. With no chance of a fire, we unrolled our sleeping bags underneath the broad cedar boughs. The woods were deathly silent, with no sounds of scurrying animals or fluttering wings. I felt utterly exposed, huddling against the wide trunk, clutching my useless little hatchet for comfort. Sleep did not come easy, but total exhaustion eventually pulled me under. I dreamt of wandering a pitch-black maze, fearing each blind turn. Distant screams echoed all around, but I could find no one, only more endless corridors and blank walls. I awoke with a gasp, unsure what time it was. The cedar's outstretched limbs nearly blotted out the night sky. Mark was sitting up against the opposite side of the trunk, a hatchet resting across his lap. Neither of us dared try sleeping at the same time. "My turn to keep watch?" I whispered. He just nodded, eyes reflecting the barest hint of moonlight filtering down. I sat up and leaned back against the rough bark, fighting the urge to close my heavy lids. Time crawled by at a glacial pace. Adrenaline and fear kept me wired and alert until the first faint light of dawn began to illuminate the forest. I roused Mark from his restless slumber. Another joyless breakfast of a mere handful of dried fruit and nuts got us moving again. The endless sea of trees still yielded no clues to our location. But now a pervasive dread convinced me we would wander lost in this forest until we simply wasted away. I nearly jumped out of my skin when Mark grabbed my shoulder mid-morning. "Alex, look," he hissed. I followed his pointing hand and could barely breathe. Carved into a tree just off to our right was a symbol we recognized, part of the trail that had led us into the forest's depths. "It's a way out," Mark yelled, embracing me. Cautious hope surged through me as we scrambled over to examine the marking. We quickly found more familiar symbols marching ahead between the trunks and eagerly followed them like breadcrumbs. Mark and I hurried along the trail of familiar markings with renewed vigor, scarcely believing our luck. After days of aimless wandering, these symbols were lifelines thrown to lost sailors. Late afternoon arrived, and still the markings appeared, urging us up a craggy ridge. As we crested the rocky slope, voices echoed ahead. My heart leaped. Could it be? We rushed forward and were nearly tackled by Steve, Julie, and Jake, their cries of relief and joy mixing with ours. They had been searching for us for days after losing our trail, and by some miracle, they had found this path again just hours ago. "Holy shit, we'd nearly given up hope of finding you two," Steve said, grinning ear to ear as he embraced me. Julie had both arms wrapped around a weary but smiling Mark. "Thank God you're all right," she murmured. Jake gave me a playful shake. "We've been so worried, man." Mark and I sank down by their small camp, almost delirious with gratitude. As we wolfed down the first real food we'd eaten in days, we took turns recounting our separate ordeals. "We never found any trail leading out," Julie said, her voice haunted. "Just more of those disturbing markings." She trailed off with a shudder. Mark took her hand gently. "It's going to be okay now that we found each other." But I could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes. Steve tossed a branch angrily into the sputtering campfire. "I say we get up at the crack of dawn and hike straight back to the cars. No more weird detours. We're getting out of here. Enough's enough." Huddled close to the campfire, we focused on community and laughter. The horror of the past days melted away as we swapped familiar stories and inside jokes. I awoke to rays of morning sun spearing down through the pine branches above. Today, we would finally escape these oppressive woods. Nearby, my friends hurriedly packed up camp with urgency. Once I was ready, Mark met my eyes. "Let's move fast today. Stay sharp." I nodded, sliding my hatchet into my belt. We were getting out today, no matter what it took. Setting off along the trail of disturbing symbols again, unease crept in as I noticed they were now viciously gouged into the trees. Jagged gashes ripped through bark as if raging at our potential escape. We quickened pace, ignoring aching muscles and hunger pangs. The rising sun lit our path. We just had to outrun the shadows. I was scanning the trail when a sharp cry pierced the air that seemed to come from every direction at once. It was abruptly cut off, replaced by echoing silence. We all froze, whipping our heads around. "Jake!" Julie yelled out. No reply came. He had been right next to her only a moment before. Now he was simply gone. "Where did it come from? Which way?" Steve shouted in confusion, eyes darting wildly. But the source of the cries was impossible to pinpoint. Mark gripped his hatchet, knuckles white. "Stay together. Keep your eyes open." We huddled close, scanning the woods while calling Jake's name. Only silence returned. Whatever lurked in this forest had snatched him swiftly and completely. Steve swayed where he stood, bracing himself against a tree. "Oh God, this can't be real." His face had gone ghostly pale. Julie collapsed to her knees, choking back sobs. Mark helped her up, clutching her shaking shoulders. His jaw was clenched tight, eyes brimming with tears. I felt numb and helpless. Jake was just gone without a trace. We had to accept that any hope of saving him had vanished just as swiftly. Mark turned to me, anguish etched on his face. "We can't leave him out here alone. Not while there's any chance." His voice broke. I grasped his shoulder, knowing we had to try something. "You and Julie keep searching around here. Steve and I will hike out to get help." Julie's eyes flashed with hope. She grabbed a rope from her pack and handed it to Mark. "We'll keep calling for him. I know you'll find us again." Steve stared at the shadowy trees uneasily, but nodded. "Yeah, we'll move quickly and bring back whoever we can." We clasped arms bracingly. I gave Julie my magnesium fire starter. "Light this if you get lost. We'll spot the signal." She squeezed my hand, blinking back tears. Mark drew his hatchet and handed it to me. "Use this to mark your way, and be fast as you can." I gripped the handle tightly as we embraced. Then Steve and I turned to follow the trail out, glancing back to see Mark and Julie moving in the other direction, calling Jake's name. Steve and I hiked swiftly through the dim pre-dawn light, using Mark's hatchet to mark our way along the trail of pagan symbols. We had to get help before it was too late for Jake, Julie, and Mark, who were still lost somewhere in these woods. As the rising sun gradually illuminated the forest around us, I felt my sense of hope fading. The twisting trail was marked by more and more disturbing symbols carved aggressively into the trees. There seemed to be no end in sight to these cursed woods. We pushed on doggedly throughout the morning, trying our best to follow the marked trail. But the bizarre pagan markings appeared randomly, often leaving us searching in vain for the path forward. It was as if the forest itself was shifting to deliberately disorient us. Near midday, we reached a rocky clearing where the trail disappeared completely among a jumble of moss-covered boulders. I frantically scoured the trees at the clearing's edge, but could see no trace of the familiar markings. "This can't be happening," Steve exclaimed in frustration. He rushed forward and examined a few trees, only to find them unmarred. "The trail's gone cold." My shoulders slumped in despair. We had lost our only guide through this maze of pines, but giving up was not an option. Jake's life and possibly the others still depended on us finding help. After some debate, we simply picked a direction that seemed to follow the general trajectory of the lost trail. All we could do was push ahead and pray the way out revealed itself soon. But an icy knot of dread had settled in my gut. Late afternoon, we stumbled upon another cluster of the eerie markings slashed across a deadfall. We took up the trail again with renewed hope, only to have it peter out before dusk among endless identical trees. Exhausted and disoriented, we made camp under the branches of an old hemlock. Without a fire, the darkness pressed in close around us, magnifying every small sound of the wilderness. Sleep came fitfully, my mind haunted by visions of Jake and the others alone and lost out there. At first light, we forced down a meager breakfast and continued onward. The woods seemed even more tangled and foreign than the day before. But after a few miles, the trees finally began to thin and light streamed down unfiltered. A gravel path sliced through the undergrowth ahead. We had found the road out. With renewed energy, we jogged down the gravel lane until it led us past a final bend and out before a small ranger station. My knees nearly buckled in relief at the beautiful sight of other human beings. The ranger's eyes grew wide as we told our story of the missing friends still lost deep in the forest. They quickly radioed for backup while we gulped water and wolfed down plates of food, bodies and minds utterly spent. Before long, a group was assembled to head into the woods. Well-armed rangers accompanied search dogs and emergency medics. We would lead them back to where we had left the others. Although every fiber of me screamed to stay in the safety and light of that ranger station, I knew I had to guide the search party. The hike back in was grueling. Every shadow between the trees took on lurking malice. Every stray sound could be the potential approach of something inhuman. Late afternoon, we reached the rocky pit where we had left our friends searching for Jake. But no trace of them remained, except scattered ashes of a long-dead fire. The search dogs scoured the area, but could not pick up a scent. No tracks or signs of a trail led away from the abandoned campsite. They were simply gone. A heavy dread settled upon the group as we fanned out to search the surrounding woods. But they yielded no clues either, only endless trees and rocks steeped in shadow. That was when the distant wailing started. It echoed through the branches like a mournful siren, rising and falling in unearthly cadences. The hair on my neck prickled at the sound. Every instinct screamed for us to flee this cursed place. In the following days, helicopters scanned the forest from above, while police, medics, and SWAT teams swarmed the area around the abandoned encampment. But not a single additional trace of our missing friends was ever discovered. It was as if the dark forest had simply swallowed them whole. After a week of fruitless and increasingly dangerous efforts, local authorities gave up the search. No trace of my friends was ever located. It's been over 20 years now since that camping trip, but not a day goes by that I don't think about what happened in those remote woods. The friends I lost, the evil we awakened that haunts me still. I left Alaska soon after, desperate to outrun the nightmares. But distance has not dulled the terror of that week, or my nagging sense of responsibility. I should have tried harder to turn us around, to resist the strange pull of that path. But the curiosity of youth blinded me. Steve has handled the trauma differently. He drinks to silence the guilt. But I know the shadows still find them both in the darkest hours. Personally, I've just tried to shut it away and move on. Focus on work, my family, and simple day-to-day living. But at night, my dreams take me back down that winding trail. I hear their cries, just out of reach. The official story is that our friends simply got lost in the deep wilderness. But I know something ancient and hungry haunts that forest, luring travelers to their doom. We awakened it, and the others paid the price.